Okay, here we go. Season 2, Steve Walter Photo Podcast, the Talkin Topics. My name is Steve Walter. I am writing solo today. I don't know why I did that weird voice, but I'm writing solo today. It's just me, and I think I'm going to start doing more of these because what I've recognized is a couple of things. So let's address a few things before we even dive into today's topic. There we go. That's how you say it, which is going to be modeling, but we'll get to that. But let's talk about a few things that I've recognized and that I am aware of. I'm aware that I have not been producing as much content, specifically within the podcast realm. And really what that comes down to is the amount of pre-production and production that is involved with that. Now, I set out a year ago to say, hey, I want to record a podcast. I want to create something, I want to share, and I did that, and I've been doing that, and it's great and it's fun, but what I've recognized is that it's a lot of work, and when it comes down to time management, there are things that I would rather put my time towards, especially when it comes down to the work-life balance. And my life is my wife and my 2 beautiful daughters. So making sure that they are healthy, because the past couple of weeks they have not been. Ear infections, pink eye, you know the whole drill. Or maybe you don't. So that's where my priority's been. And, you know, obviously holidays, all that stuff. I'm here, so what I'm going to do is record more of these solo podcasts, because also getting guests on, takes time. And what I found is that even with myself and a small little podcast that I have, is that people kind of want to know, like, well, what's your podcast about? Who's your target audience? And where's this podcast going? How are you delivering it? And it's like, wow, that's a lot of questions, good questions, valid questions. But then I realize, yeah, this is just me wanting to share content. I don't really have a major platform. Obviously I try to put it on YouTube, but these, where it's just me solo, probably just going to go on SoundCloud and in your podcast app, because it comes down to the simplicity of my workflow. And right now I'm actually trying something new, so let's talk about that. I swear we'll get to the topic. I swear we will, but I just have things on my mind, and it's a podcast, and I want to share them with you. So speaking of workflow, I have an entirely different workflow right now, because I'm trying to find a way for me to be able to record content whenever it hits my mind, right? Because I have a whole list of things that I want to do, topics that I want to talk about, and it's like, okay, I got to go to the studio, I got to set up the mics, I got to get the recorder going, and then I got to take those files, load them on the computer, do the edit, put it in Final Cut because I want to publish the video with the image, and it becomes a whole thing. So what I'm doing right now is I have a microphone and an iPad, and that's it. So I'm very curious to see, I think the quality of this should be pretty good. I did a couple tests, so the audio that you're hearing should be pretty good, pretty nice. It should be pretty nice. You got to do the bass voice, because that's what people want to hear, and that's what defines quality, is the amount of bass. We all know that. Anyway, different setup, different workflow, so if things are different, that's why. Let's talk about today's topic, and I do have some notes. Let me go ahead, and that's the other cool thing, is I have my notes right here on the iPad, so I can look and reference them, which is really nice. Not having to worry about video and what I look like, although I will say this, I'm having a nice hair day. Let's talk about modeling. Yeah, speaking of hair days, let's talk about modeling. So I wanted to talk about modeling because recently I was on the search for some models for a shoot that I'm doing. And it's not a shoot for me, it's a shoot for a client. So there's a difference there, and we'll get into that. Let's not get into that. Let's just get into that. Let's not wait. There's a difference between when I'm shooting for me or when I'm shooting for a client, right? Because when I'm shooting for me, if I'm looking for a model, I know I have a vision, and I'm okay if we maybe stray from that vision a little bit. But I know that if I get a model, I could probably, especially I'm speaking amateur models, right, at this point, whether it be a professional or an amateur. Let's just talk about amateur right now. So if I'm looking for an amateur model, let's say I pop on Instagram, or just even people that I photographed before, my friends, things like that, I know that I am sort of sacrificing the fact that, hey, this is for me, this is a personal shoot, or maybe I have an idea of something that I want to do, and we'll make do with whatever we get out of it. Right, so I'm speaking specifically about a trade for shoot. If you're not familiar, the TF or trade for it's a barter. That's what people should use, is the word barter, because everyone knows what barter is. But trade for is basically a barter, saying that, hey, I'm a photographer, I have a skill set, and you're a model, and you have a skill set. Let's exchange those skill sets for an equal amount, right? Meaning, I'm going to give you some photos, and you're going to give me some modeling. That's really it. Now, obviously, you should always have, if you're a photographer or a model, you should always have that conversation. Actually, 100%, if you're a model, you should definitely be having that conversation, because there's too many stories that I've heard of where a model, quote unquote, gets screwed out of images because they didn't have a conversation or an understanding of what was going to be delivered to them. And it's sad and it stinks. And I recognize what could happen with a photographer, because if they're shooting and they're shooting a whole bunch of stuff and they just want to shoot, and they have this back catalog of all these models that they photographed or just these things that they photographed, if they didn't get paid for it, they might go, I'll get to it when I get to it. But a model might say, well, okay, I showed up, I modeled, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 6 months has gone by. Hey, can I see some of those images? And the photographer might think, yeah, well, you didn't pay me, so I'll get to them when I get to them. No, there should be an understanding. There should be an agreement, meaning if a model's showing up, they're providing their time. A photographer's showing up, they're providing their time. You should know what you're getting out of that, right? So there should be a benefit to both of you, especially if one party is not being paid, because the payment thing, that's the thing that motivates you, right? If I pay a model, the motivation on the model is to show up. If a model pays me, the motivation for me is to deliver images. So make sure you're having those conversations. But there is a difference between when I'm shooting for myself and when I'm shooting for a client. If I'm shooting for a client, there's going to be a much more specific target of who I'm looking for. So if I recently put out a casting call and I had a whole lot of people reply to me, and I say, great, cool, thank you guys, I will make sure that the client knows that you are interested. And if there are people that send me a message and they're like, oh, you didn't pick me, it's like I needed 4 models and I had a whole lot of people reply to me, which is great, and thank you guys so much for that if you are in fact listening. But that's something where it's not up to me. At that point, I'm just really acting as a producer to try to source people, to find people, and hopefully, if the client, you fit in that target of what they want, then great, then we'll do it. So that's just something to think about. There is that difference there when it's something for myself versus a client, and when it's for a client, I want to make sure that I'm getting the right people. And what I found difficult was the fact that the shoot that I was doing with them is a lifestyle shoot, right? So happy, fun, everyone's enjoying themselves, a few different scenarios of things like that, right? So predominantly smiles are what we're going to be capturing. And what I found was when I was searching, I didn't see a lot of smiles from models. And again, if I'm tapping into that more amateur realm, amateur to pro realm, not a lot of smiles. Once you go into the pro realm, for sure, because that's a whole other level. Now, one of the things that you might be saying to yourself right now, well, Steve, yeah, if you want the smiles, you got to pay for it. And you're 100% right. And that's what I found very quickly, was that a lot of the amateur models, let's call them quote unquote Instagram models, most of what they're modeling is this sort of moody, sultry, sexy kind of, attitude, dramatic looks. That's what they want to photograph, because I don't know if it's just because what they've seen, or maybe it's just what they enjoy doing, right? Or maybe it's just because they haven't practiced the other side of things. So the fact that it's cool because anyone can be a model, right? So the fact that anyone can be a model is great. And I would highly encourage, if you're interested in modeling at all, in any way, shape, or form, try it. Stand in front of a camera and pose and smile and move. And even before you do that in front of a mirror, right? Try to be comfortable with the process, and then actually do a photo shoot and see what it's like. And if you really do enjoy it, then take the time to refine, and I don't want to say perfect, but refine that craft, right? Get better at it. So when I see a lot of models that, or I should say amateur models, right? So we're talking about amateur models at this point. I see a lot of amateur models on Instagram, and they're being featured and they're getting a lot of likes, and that's great. I don't know how much they're getting paid, because I just don't know. People don't reveal that. Some of these models will put in their description, DM me for rates, right? Send me a message to find out my rates, which, okay, cool. And I saw a lot of people that way. And then what I started doing was scrolling through their feed and realized they had one look, and it was just sexy and dramatic. And that was it. So I look at that person and I go, well, you're charging me. You want to charge me because you have one look and you do that very well. Clearly, because that's all you had examples of. It was frustrating to me to think that oh, I would love to just see a smile from you because I might be able to present you to the client and I might be able to get you a paid gig, a well-paid gig, but I can't because you don't have any examples of that. And maybe it's because that person specifically or those people don't want to do that work. But when I think about this process of modeling, I think about versatility. Because I also think about that as a photographer. I think about that I need to have some versatility, right? I need to be able to shoot a dramatic look. I need to be able to shoot a happy look. There are some photographers that only shoot one thing and that's all they do, like landscape photographers. That's what they photograph. But they might photograph, a bright sunny day, and they also might photograph a stormy night. So there is some contrast there, and you need to know the differences there. So some versatility, right? But in modeling, typically, right, especially if this is something, I should say this, right? Sorry, my thoughts are slightly scattered, also not, because I do have notes, but I'm trying to connect them all in a natural way. So in talking about amateur models, the versatility, if you want to work, the versatility is sort of crucial. Sure, dramatic and sexy is awesome. And a lot of people, a lot of photographers are going to want to spend a couple hours with you, make some dope images because they want to play with lighting or they want to just shoot at golden hour or they want to, follow the latest trend, right? And that's great for both of you because you're gaining experience and you should do that. I spent a lot of time doing that. And what I realized was, okay, cool. I've built up a portfolio. I have a lot of experience. I'm very comfortable with the process. Now, if somebody reaches out to me and says, hey, I would love to photograph with you. I'd love to work with you. I say, okay, well, send me your email and I'll let you know what I would charge. And then a lot of times I don't hear back from anyone. And I'm sure it's because they say, well, either they're not comfortable enough or they just, they realize that someone else will do it for free, and that's fine. And that's sort of the nature of this business now, especially, again, speaking about in the amateur world, that everyone could be a model. And that's great. But if it's something that you actually really want to do, if you really want to work as a model, you need to have versatility. And not only versatility, but you also need to have professionalism, right? So when we go back to talking about, even if, let's say, I'm not charging anyone and I connect with a model and I say, hey, I would love to work with you. I have this idea. Cool, let's set up a date to shoot. Okay, awesome, let's shoot. And then they don't show up. Or they're 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I've had someone over almost an hour late to a shoot, and you might say, well, Steve, why'd you hang out? It's like, well, I drove some distance. I was there, and I waited. And thankfully, we still got some good images, but I basically had to say, well, now look, we had a 3-hour time slot. Well, now we've got 2 hours because, this is what I booked for us. I get it. No one's being paid here, but in my mind, I treat any kind of call it spec work or any kind of trade for shoot as it should be a professional shoot, because that's really what you should be trying to gain the experience for, is the process of what is it like to show up, to shoot, and then to deliver, right? So when someone's that late, you start to realize, okay, well, this person's not very professional. And at the end of the day, you don't know who I am. You don't know what opportunities I might be able to have, and vice versa. So when it comes time for me to thinking about, well, do I want to hire this person because a client has a budget and I could work with you? Do I want to give you that opportunity, or do I want to take that risk? I guess is really the other way to think about it. And the answer is going to be no, because you were an hour late to us showing up for free. So there's something to be said about everyone could be a model. Amateur models are great, but show up and be on time and be professional, be courteous, make sure you have communication, all of those things. And have that versatility, right? There should obviously be a conversation that's had between you and the photographer, whether you are an amateur or you're a pro, to say, hey, what am I doing? What are we doing? What's the idea? What's the concept? What kind of things are you looking from me? Am I bringing my own wardrobe? Is there going to be a stylist, hair and makeup, etc.? Those are all other conversations that should be had. I don't want to dive too deep into all of that stuff because I do have a few other things that I want to talk about. But that should kind of go without saying, is that the communication part is huge, is making sure that whoever you're working with, whether it be a model or any other type of creative, if you're working with a model, you want to make sure you have the conversation to say, here's the concept, here's the idea. Are you comfortable with that? And if they say yes, then say, okay, cool. here's how long we're going to shoot for. Here's how many images I will deliver to you. Here's what I expect from you. So basically just managing expectations, guys. That's it. Just managing expectations. Hold on, slight coffee break. You guys can ponder about that for a second. Okay, next. So we talked about versatility. We talked about professionalism. Anyone could be a model. Amateurs, great. Let's still keep talking about amateurs, right? Because pros are different. Pros are pros. This conversation isn't really for pros. As a model, what you want to do, this kind of goes along with versatility, but really it just goes along with experience and education, is you want to have some photographic knowledge, meaning you want to have a slight understanding of light. You also want to have understanding of, if I tell you, hey, I've got a 50 millimeter on, you should kind of have an idea of what that is. Or if you don't know, ask. And that's the other part. Hey, do you want me facing this way or do you want me facing that way? If I'm giving direction and I want you to turn a certain way, and if in your mind you're like, well, that isn't the side that I prefer, well, it might not be something that affects me. So if, for example, your left side is your better side, but I have you facing to the right, and if that image works for me, it doesn't matter to me what your good side is at this point, right? Because if it's something editorial or if it's something lifestyle, right, it doesn't matter. Let me find what side I think works better. But you should have an awareness of, hey, are you shooting full length? How close are you? Do you want me moving in this direction? And the reason why I might have you facing the way that you wouldn't prefer to face is because that's where the good light is. So those are things to be aware of. So understanding light, understanding some photographic knowledge. Now, again, you don't need to be an expert in this by any means. And if you don't know about it, ask those questions. Because one of the things that I see a lot of in amateur models is, there's this sort of free-flowing with posing. And the arms by the face is like a big thing, hands and arms and like elbows reaching out. And what happens is a lot of times your arm or your elbow is going to be blocking the light that's hitting your face. And if I'm photographing your face, well, that's a missed image in my opinion. So that's just some things to be aware of, right? Having that communication of photographic knowledge. And that kind of goes along with posing, but also understanding some lighting and understanding the difference between a wide angle lens and a telephoto lens, for example. Meaning, are you close to me? Can you see full length, or are you just photographing my face? Now, that is something that a photographer should communicate, right? Before, like, hey, if I switch the lens, hey, just so you know, I'm photographing from here to here, or, don't worry about your feet because they're not in the image, things like that. So if you're not aware and if you need to know how to pose, you need to have that communication. You need to ask those questions. And then posing, right? Kind of going along with that. You should be really comfortable with posing. I was talking about it earlier, but standing in front of a mirror. This is something that I've done a whole bunch. Sitting in front of a mirror, facial expressions, right? Like learning how to, as I call it, turtle and squint. And turtling is really just kind of extending your head closer to the camera to kind of, tighten up your jawline. And then squinting your eyes. And squinting your eyes is the process of raising your lower eyelids. You actually use the orbicularis oculi, is the muscle group that controls your lower eyelids. I said that real serious, like, oh man, look at this guy, orbicularis oculi. No, I learned that from a photo shoot actually. And see, here you go. I learned that from a photo shoot. I was photographing headshots at a plastic surgeon's office, and I was like, oh, this guy will know. So I asked him, I was like, hey, what's that? What's the muscle group? He's like, oh, it's the orbicularis oculi. And I was like, yes, I love that. So that's the word of the day, orbicularis oculi. Anyway, that's the squinting. So I've practiced in front of a mirror a whole bunch to learn how to make that face so that when I'm not looking at a mirror, I know how to make that face. And that's what every model should know how to do. Every model should be practicing in front of a mirror, getting into a pose so they can see what looks good, right? And you're going to know your body better than anyone else, and you should, especially if you're a model. See what looks good, and then know how to get into that pose without the mirror. And then not only that pose, but 5 other poses. And have all 5 of those poses connect, meaning you want to start in one pose and then go gently flow into another one, and then flow into another one, and then flow into another one. Especially, again, if you're somewhat of a lifestyle model, or even if you're doing a fashion model. That's why I see a lot of fashion. You should know how to get into some of these, essential poses, the sort of basic posing 101 there. So posing, make sure you know your stuff. And if you don't, educate yourself. Watch some YouTube videos. There's tons out there. Lindsay Adler has a posing class. Now, it's really for photographers to tell models how to pose, but there's good information there if you are a model, because now you're learning from a photographer. Sue Bryce is another one. And they mostly are posing with women, but there's definitely some masculine poses in there too. So when I say models, I'm definitely not just talking about women. I'm definitely including men. Like if you're out there, you're modeling, you should be doing all of the same things that I'm saying. So when I say model, I'm men and women 100%. Cool. So educate yourself, right? Take a class, go attend a workshop for posing, for modeling. Now, this is also where you can get connected with things like agencies, right? So if you're in that amateur realm, you've done some posing, you've done some work, you feel comfortable in front of a camera, you enjoy what you're doing, and you say, okay, cool, I want to take this to the next level. What do? I need more experience. I need more practice, yada, yada, yada. Agencies. So let's talk a little bit about agencies, because I am definitely not a model, so I don't know the full ins and outs of how that agency world works, but I have some understanding because I've connected with agencies. And really, it's going to come down to if you sign with an agency. So these are kind of general statements, right? Obviously, every agency might be a little bit different, but these are going to be some general statements and things to be aware of. You sign with an agency, chances are they're going to give you some education, right? Because what they want to do, and depending upon if that's something that they include for free, or if they say, hey, if you want to sign with us, it's going to cost you $300. We give you a 6-month agreement, or a 1-year or a 2-year agreement. And that $300 includes classes for you to learn how to do runway, yada, yada, whatever it is. I don't know. That's where you'd have that conversation. But what they should be trying to do is educate you so you are a better model. Because at the end of the day, the whole purpose of an agency is to have a whole bunch of people that they would then present to either photographers or agencies, other marketing agencies, things like that, to say, hey, here are all these amazing people that represent us, and they're going to be qualified to deliver good modeling, good posing, good work for you. So it's in their best interest to make sure that you know what you're doing. So see if they offer that, if this is, again, something that you're interested in. And the other thing that's going to come along with an agency is they're basically going to own you. And I know that sounds worse than it actually is. But what they're going to do is they're going to own your imagery. Chances are when you sign with an agency, you're going to be working with them. They are going to call you and say, hey, the photographer wants to work with you. Here's the time. Here's the location. Here's what's expected of you. Here's what you need to do. So show up and do good work, right? So then you go there, you show up, you do good work, and then the agency gives you a cut. They get you paid, and then that's it. You go on with your life. Now, those images, you might want to say, oh, I want to use those images on my Instagram. Well, those images are not owned by you, the model. Those images are owned by the photographer. And depending upon the agreement the photographer had with the agency might own those images themselves. So it might not even be the photographer that owns those images. It might be the agency that owns those images. So that's kind of what I meant by them owning you, meaning that your work that you do, because you're being represented by them, because they're going out there trying to find work for you, they own those images, right? And you would sign an agreement that goes over all of this stuff. And if you're not sure, ask the agency. Make sure you're asking those questions, because I know it could seem like, oh, cool, I'm working with an agency now. Cool, let me just sign over here. And then you realize all these images that you've taken, you might not have access to. Now, chances are in that agreement, it would say that you could use those images, right? They would be licensed to you, or not necessarily licensed, but you would have rights to use those images for your own portfolio and your own, personal distribution, right? For example, you couldn't take an image of you modeling a white t-shirt and sell it to a company that wants to use that image, right? Because you don't own that image at that point. It would either be the agency's image that they own or the photographer's image that they own. So, or depending upon the client, they might want to own that image. So there's a lot of those things happening. So be aware of that, in that you might shoot this, campaign or this shoot with a company, and you might not ever see those images for 6, 9, you might not be able to see those images for a year, because maybe the shoot that you were doing in January, those images might not be published until June, and no one can see those images until June. So it's not uncommon for that to happen. So when we go back to the conversation of saying things like a trade for, right? Hey, where's my images? Well, that would be an understanding that you would have to say, well, you're not going to see those images for a long time because I'm the photographer, I don't even have the right to publish those images at this point. So those are all things to be aware of. But at the end of the day, you're working as a model. So that's part of the process. And those images that you would have, you would want to make sure that you have rights to use those in your portfolio. Now, that's a conversation that you should also have, right? Let's talk about before the agency, right? We're working Instagram, we're working with people, having an understanding and agreement, depending upon, you should have a signed agreement with whomever you're working with. And it doesn't always happen. Most of the time it doesn't happen. Let's just be honest. Most of the time it doesn't happen. But you should have an agreement that states what you can do with those images, what you can't do with those images, what the photographer's doing with those images, what they can't do with those images. Normally what's going to happen with a model is you're going to sign a modeling release saying you have no rights to those images and that the photographer owns those images and they can do whatever they want with them. So if I work with you and you sign a model release, whatever images we take, I can sell and distribute to whomever I like because I own those. I was the creator of those. But within that agreement, I would include you can use these images for your own personal work, meaning for your own personal portfolio, because you want to show people your versatility, going back to one of the other talking points. You want to show people that you're good at what you do, so you should have access to those images. So make sure you're having those conversations there. And then last but not least, the thing I wanted to talk about is your rates and the fees, right? So I kind of talked about it earlier where when I was looking for people, they would say DM for rates. Your rate should be reflected upon your experience and maybe even your expertise, right? So if you are a hand model, for example, let's say you have amazing hands and you're very experienced at hand modeling, well, that's a very specific thing that someone would be looking for. But if they are looking for that, you might be one of, 20 people versus one of 20,000 people, right? Because hand models, I imagine, because that is such a select, narrow scope of people, if you have experience and you're potentially in high demand, you can charge a really healthy rate for that. So your rate should reflect upon your experience and potentially your expertise. So when it comes down to seeing a model, and if your rate, let's just use flat numbers, say $100 an hour, you charge $100 an hour to shoot a minimum of 2 hours, so you're getting $200. Great. Well, if I look through your book and all I see are these moody, dramatic portraits, okay, cool, I want to hire you for that. You should, without a doubt, be showing up to that shoot, ready to go, moody, dramatic portraits. Again, assuming there was a conversation that was said about that, hey, we're shooting moody and dramatic. Cool, good, that's why I'm paying you $200. I, as a photographer, should be able to give you very loose and minimal direction because you've told me, without actually telling me, you've told me that you are experienced enough for me to not have to direct every single pose because you're asking for money. Just the reverse is true. As a photographer, I'm going to say, hey, here's what I charge, and you're not going to see me fiddling with lights. You're not going to see me messing around with settings going, oh, wait, hold on, let me try this. Okay, let me do this. You know what? Maybe let's try. No, you're not going to see that. It's going to be, let's get these shots. It's going to be efficient because I'm experienced and I'm comfortable with that. So the reverse should be true on the model's part. So when you're charging your rates, make sure they reflect your experience and your expertise. Now, if you're going beyond that, right? Let's say someone says, hey, okay, you charge $100 an hour, minimum of 2 hours, and you're very moody and dramatic, but I'm kind of looking for some more lifestyle, some smiles. Are you experienced with that? If you can't show that work, you might potentially be able to negotiate or should be willing to negotiate your rate a little bit because I don't have any proof that you can do that. And also on set, when you're working with that person, they might have to give you a little bit more direction, especially if you're not experienced with that. So I wouldn't want to pay someone a high rate for something that they're not experienced in, but I might be willing to take a chance because you might have the look that I'm after or that the client is after. Again, going back to versatility, I think about people like actors and actresses, right? You need a headshot. You need not one headshot, but you need two headshots, right? One that is dramatic and one that is commercial. So one that is moody and one that is happy. you need to be able to show two sides of you, because depending upon what that casting director is looking for, again, if you're an actor or actress working with an agency, that agency is presenting one headshot or the other to the casting director. So the casting director says, hey, we're doing this comedy movie and we need a whole bunch of smiling people. Cool. They're not going to start showing you the dramatic headshot. No, you want to see the happy faces headshot. The same should be true about any kind of model. Again, if you're serious about this and you want to get into this, if you don't, then ignore everything that I've said for the past X amount of time. I should mention this, in using GarageBand, it actually cut me off halfway because it had a limit. So GarageBand on the iPad is not what I will be using in the future. That's why this was a test. And that's why I don't charge people for recording a podcast, right? Because I am still learning this process. But it's good experience, and now I know 640 bars is the maximum amount of bars that you can record in GarageBand. Lesson learned. So, wrapping all that stuff up, guys, and gals, of course, modeling. If you're serious about it, invest the time and put in the effort to refine that craft. And again, not perfect it, but really just become experienced in that craft. And know that there is work out there, but it's not always going to be this high fashion, dramatic, moody thing. A lot of times it's going to be, hey, I need you to be, happy while you're sipping on some coffee. So as silly as that might sound, those are paid gigs. And are they the most fun? Not necessarily. I mean, in my opinion, I think they're really fun. I think those are, because literally you're smiling. They're fun. But that's where the work is, or there is work there. So make sure you have that versatility if you're interested in this. And as photographers, for those photographers that are listening, make sure you're having those communications with your models. Make sure your models are signing a model release. And when they're signing a model release, they know what's happening. And if you're working with an agency, make sure you're having all these conversations, all this communication. Because if you're not, in the end, you might be either losing money or losing rights, and you want to make sure that doesn't happen. So guys, thank you for hanging out. Season 2, Talkin Topics. This was on modeling. Again, I want to do more of this format of me just kind of rambling some ideas and thoughts that I have with notes that I've taken. In the future, I will not be using GarageBand, or what I might be doing is just really shortening the length of these. Honestly, I think I've been going for about a half an hour or so, and maybe that might be too long. Maybe that might be too short for me doing this solo thing, but this felt like a good amount of time. So let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you next time.